So this disclaimer, it's a positive step, but we want every platform to continue doing more to call out mis and disinformation while also uplifting accurate information.
Hey folks, welcome back to Chris Wyatt Africa. This is Chris in Central Pennsylvania. Well, conspiracy theorists have been making these claims for decades, using stories like David Koresh in Waco, Ruby Ridge, and a host of other things, saying that our federal government has been attacking Americans and liberties. Many of us questioned the conspiracy theorists and wondered what exactly they were drinking in their cocktails. But the events that occurred in the build-up to the ascension of Voldemort as president back in 2016. If you wonder why I use that pseudonym, it's so I don't get censored on this platform. But when Voldemort ran for president, he was attacked. His followers, those who showed up to hear what he had to say in Chicago, beaten and assaulted in the streets. The media lied about that narrative and claimed it was actually Voldemort supporters who were attacking leftists, when in fact the video footage showed it was quite the opposite. Innocent people walking away from the arena assaulted by violent people. Violent thugs arriving on the steps of Senator Josh Hawley with his pregnant wife, intimidating her, threatening him, disturbing the peace, threatening residents in his neighborhood, a sitting U.S. senator. The burning and looting of our cities in the summer of 2021, Minneapolis Police Department, the murder of a MAGA hat-wearing conservative black man in Milwaukee simply for wearing the hat. The list goes on and on about incidents of violence and domestic terrorism against law-abiding citizens in this country. But let's be clear about one thing very specifically. The First Amendment of the Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. But unfortunately, on the 1st of February, the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, formerly from the State Department, formerly from commercial media, suborned suppression of free speech from the private sector to carry out actions unlawful under the Constitution by the federal government to get the private sector to act on behalf of the federal government to achieve something this administration wants to do: silence its critics.
So this disclaimer, it's a positive step, but we want every platform to continue doing more to call out mis and disinformation while also uplifting accurate information.
The problem is the number of critics is growing by the hour with the abject failure of this corrupt regime, its despicable withdrawal from Afghanistan, hyperinflation, its failure on the pandemic front. The list goes on and on and on. The pervasive corruption throughout the organization. And so what happens now? First, let's listen to what Jen Psaki had to say when she called for the private sector to do what the federal government can't on their behalf.
Spotify is putting out advisory warnings on episodes that have to do with COVID-19. Does the White House and the administration think this is a satisfactory step, or do you think that companies like Spotify should go further than just putting a label on there to say, hey, go do your own, check this out. There's more research you can look at, scientific research regarding COVID.
Sure. Well, last July, you probably know, but the Surgeon General also took the unprecedented step to issue an advisory on the risk of misinformation in public health, which is a very significant step. And amid that, he talked about the role social media platforms have. So our hope is that all major tech platforms and all major news sources, for that matter, be responsible and be vigilant to ensure the American people have access to accurate information on something as significant as COVID-19. That certainly includes Spotify.
So we jump forward to less than a week later on the 7th of February. This Department of Homeland public released terrorism threat statement, the 7th of February, 2022. Now, where was this assessment, which I'm going to read to you now? Where was this in 2020 with regards to domestic terrorism from BLM and Antifa? February 7th, 2022, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. National Terrorism Advisory System Bulletin, February 7th. The United States remains in a heightened threat environment fueled by several factors, including an online environment filled with false or misleading narratives and conspiracy theories, and other forms of mis, dis, and malinformation, MDM, introduced or amplified by foreign and domestic actors. These threat actors seek to exacerbate social friction, to sow discord, and undermine public trust in government institutions to encourage unrest, which could potentially inspire acts of violence. Mass casualty attacks and other acts of targeted violence conducted by lone offenders or small groups acting in furtherance of ideological beliefs and or personal grievances pose an ongoing threat to the nation. While the conditions underlying the heightened threat landscape have not significantly changed over the last year, so why are you using this bulletin? The convergence of the following factors has increased the volatility, unpredictability, and complexity of the threat. The proliferation of false or misleading narratives which sow discord or undermine public trust in U.S. government institutions, continuing calls for violence directed at U.S. critical infrastructure, soft targets, and mass gatherings, faith-based institutions such as churches, synagogues, and mosques, institutions of higher education, racial and religious minorities, government facilities and personnel, including law enforcement and the military, the media, and perceived ideological opponents, and calls by foreign terrorist organizations for attacks in the U.S. based on recent events. Yet, there's nothing here to substantiate what they're talking about. Key factors contributing to this are the following. The proliferation of false or misleading narratives which sow discord or undermine public trust in U.S. government institutions. For example, there's widespread online proliferation of false or misleading narratives regarding unsubstantiated, widespread blank from 2020 and the pandemic. Grievances associated with these themes inspired violent extremist attacks during 2021. Which violent extremist attacks were inspired in 2021 by such online grievances? So the government is claiming that the absence of hate speech, the absence of inciting violence is causing the domestic terrorism level to be heightened. So free speech is a threat to the federal government. Really? Mis, dis, and malinformation. Really? Should we go through the mis, dis, and malinformation from the federal government, the lies that have been spewed to us by the federal government just in the last 12 months? There was no other way. There was no better way to pull out Afghanistan. That's a lie. Joe Biden, 127,000 troops massed on the border with Ukraine. That's a lie. Tens of thousands, if not close to 80 or 100,000, were already on the borders in the eastern portion of Ukraine on the Russian border and in the Crimea, which was occupied under this president when he was vice president and said nothing about it and allowed Russia to occupy and annex the Crimea. So why now? 127,000 troops. And then Joe Biden lies, saying it will be the largest invasion since the Second World War. Simply factually untrue, ladies and gentlemen. I've previously published a video in which I ran through a number of military invasions which far surpassed that number, including Chinese crossing the Yalu in 1950 to push back UN and American forces, the Chinese invading Vietnam in 1979 with 200,000 troops, nearly 1 million Arab and Cuban troops invading Israel in the Yom Kippur War of 1973, 670,000 U.S. troops and coalition troops in a 28-nation coalition in 1991, which I participated in. Basically, what the government is saying is that anyone that says anything against the government is a threat. Now, where was this in the summer of 2020 when Minneapolis police station was attacked, burned, looted, weapons stolen? A black man was shot on a stoop in Milwaukee for wearing a MAGA hat. And insurrectionists declared an independent state in Seattle called Chaz, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. You notice how they always want to say CHOP now because they changed the name when they realized that their actions were treasonous and they were insurrectionists in rebellion, open rebellion against the United States. So instead of saying the Capitol Autonomous Zone, its own country, they changed it to CHOP. This insurrectionist movement that declared its own state in Seattle segregated that state in a blacks-only zone. Ladies and gentlemen, the bottom line is this. The state, i.e. the federal government, has turned on Americans. Just days after hundreds of thousands of Canadians frightened Prime Minister blackface Justin Trudeau into cowering fear over parked trucks, honking horns, and free speech. The Department of Homeland Security has amped up the attack on American citizens. What's next? No-knock warrants for reporting the outcome of a Pennsylvania court on its Act 77 from the legislature back in October of 2019. We can't speak about what that act says for risk of being censored. Now, the statement that the Department of Homeland Security is making about this amped up terrorism threat, this tweet from someone says it quite well. By their statement, 80% of Americans are suspect simply by posting links to scientific studies questioning current policy. One is undermining faith in the government and therefore, presumably, aiding and abetting terrorism. In other words, facts undermine party unity. Does it sound familiar? Have we heard this in the Czech Republic after the Prague Spring? Have we heard this in Budapest in 1956, Germany 1953, the Soviet Union throughout its entire history, the Chi-Coms in Beijing? This is Orwellian and chilling to the core. The Department of Homeland Security has placed a marker misleading the public about this false statement. They offer no factual evidence here, just supposition and innuendo to denigrate tens of millions, nay, hundreds of millions of Americans who simply ask legitimate questions and post things about distrust in government. Do you think that the events of the past 2 years are the reason why Americans distrust the federal government? Perhaps the federal government's inexorable growth to make it a colossus that it's not supposed to be. Most of the authority and sovereignty in this country is reserved to the states. It's in the Constitution, specifically addressing this. The federal government, with the imposition of the federal income tax, found an outlet to make itself unimaginably wealthy, powerful, and controlling. And ever since the introduction of the income tax in the early part of the 20th century, this government has grown, one excuse after another. First the tax, then the First World War. Then the Depression was the excuse. We had to grow government programs. Then World War II, we have to save the world from fascism, only to see it come a century later right here on our own shore. Then the Korean conflict, then the Vietnam conflict, then the civil rights, the Great Society. All these things cost money. The government continues to grow to a stage in which the federal government today takes over $4.5 trillion out of your pocket and my pocket, only for them to call us terrorists for exercising our First Amendment inalienable right of free speech or seeking redress from the government. The government seeks to criminalize a difference of opinion. They have no shame, no compunction about suborning subversion of the Constitution from a private business entity. None whatsoever, ladies and gentlemen. This is shocking and disturbing, to say the very least. It's heartbreaking. After supporting and defending the Constitution for nearly 4 decades in uniform, 34 of those years on active duty, living abroad for 23 years of being abroad for 23 of those 36 years in uniform, serving in over a dozen countries in Europe and Africa, fighting in conflicts, doing peacekeeping, teaching human rights and the Geneva Convention, building schools and clinics, running epidemiological programs for HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, naval, maritime, air exercises, multinational operations, peace resolution, education. I'm crestfallen and heartbroken at what is happening to this nation. And our government has turned on us. And the sheep will buy it, because they're uninformed or they're apparatchiks for the mechanism of the state. This is heartbreaking, folks. This is a warning. This is not some conspiracy nut. This is not some loon sitting in his garage prepping with, bags of rice waiting for the apocalypse. I'm a 36-year veteran of the U.S. military. I've served in diplomatic posts. I've written for the President of the United States. I've taught undergraduates, postgraduates. I've served in multiple countries overseas and defended my country with distinction and brought liberty and freedom to millions around the world. And I'm telling you that our government is turning on us. The apparatus of the bureaucracy is being used to criminalize and attack Americans. Why does this bulletin come out now when it says basically nothing has essentially changed over the past year? They make empty claims that these mis- and malinformation activities have caused violent insurrectionist activities. Where? What? January 6th? Please, give me a frickin' break. What else? Nothing. Nothing. Attacks on Jewish synagogues have nothing to do with the effort to silence the voice of Americans, which is what's going on here. When freedom falls in America, folks, the light will go out on the planet. The Anglo-Saxon world has already betrayed the world. The United Kingdom is a disgrace. Banning demonstrations, the country that brought us John Locke, David Hume, David Ricardo, Adam Smith, the Magna Carta, English common law. The light has gone out when you ban demonstrations because you fear free speech and democracy. The Australian penal colony is beyond repair at this stage. Western Australia acting as an independent entity, banning any Australian from entering its territory. What do these people think they are? Locking people up in concentration camps in the Northern Territories who are not positive for any epidemiological threat? Terrorizing them, threatening to sedate them if they don't shut up, and then when they go home after 3 weeks of imprisonment with no justification, no warrant, no arrest, no charges, no health threat to anyone whatsoever, job is gone, they don't care. New Zealand has lost its mind. Canada has lost its mind, and Canadians have now stood up, and the politicians in Ottawa, D.C., Pretoria, London, Wellington, Canberra are wetting their nappies and scared. and with good reason. Their continued escalation and attacks on free speech and assembly can only lead to one place: total repression and imprisonment for law-abiding citizens. This needs to stop. These elected officials have abrogated their responsibility to citizens in this country and around the world. The ballot box is where they're removed. And it's time for citizens to remove these corrupt politicians from all parties, from office, and elevate people who support and defend our liberties, our inalienable rights, who believe in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, not the suppression of free speech, because opinion differs with yours. When did an opinion become a weapon? It's not. It's not. An uninformed opinion is an uninformed opinion. The state has no right to censor someone's idiotic blatherings unless they cause public harm, such as shouting fire in a crowded theater. That's a crime. It's not free speech. But disagreeing with Fauci or DHS or Boris Johnson is not a crime. Freedom of expression, freedom of thought are cherished hallmarks of liberty. And it is time to sound the clarion call to liberty for patriots the world over. You're under threat, ladies and gentlemen. Your actions will be criminalized by the sole power that has the authority to criminalize you. Governments exist to serve us. We are not the serfs of governments. It's time to answer the call, world. Stand up for what's right. Speak your mind. However you can find a place to do it, whatever social media, whatever public square, whatever newspaper you can get into, whatever radio station you can talk on. This nonsense must be stopped. You'll notice I didn't make any declarations about the choosing of 2020. I made no declarations about the pandemic. Yet this very statement, which calls for peaceful action, will possibly be deemed a threat to government, for undermining government. Ladies and gentlemen, before we entered the pandemic, the approval rating amongst voters consistently for members of Congress, the House and Senate, hovered between 9 and 13%. It's virtually impossible to lower trust in the U.S. federal government from where it was already at. Stop lying to the Americans. Stop lying to the world. You're a disgrace, and you should be ashamed of yourself. Anyone that propagates this nonsense. Folks, hang in there. It's going to get bumpier. The federal government of the United States has declared war on Americans.
So this disclaimer, it's a positive step, but we want every platform to continue doing more to call out mis and disinformation while also uplifting accurate information.
Thanks a lot for supporting the channel, folks. God bless, and be safe out there.